my friends. I'm not sure why I picked blinding lights for the intro for this, because this is going to get dark rather than be very blinding in light. So, purpose of these two videos really is to explore alternatives to social media. I spent 6 weeks really going through the difficulties of social media, if you like. This is a very critical module in many ways. There must be another way of doing things, right? If I'm just going to sit here hour after hour, day after day, moaning about social media, is there any viable alternative? Now, if you think back to the lecture 4 on social media nihilism, some contentions in that lecture, like deleting social media is about as realistic as getting rid of roads, that kind of thing. So, there is some consternation as to whether there is an alternative to social media, but there have been some proposed, and we're going to explore some of those today. And this could be useful material in terms of your critical reflective essay, for example, or you may well be looking at some of these platforms which I'm going to talk about today. So what I'm looking at really is what is meant by the dark web and alternative social media. So we'll define those terms, discuss filter bubbles and why they're critically important in understanding social media culture. So this is huge, and I expect you all to reflect on this in some way. Describe 4 alternatives to corporate social media. So we're going to look at Elo, Minds, Diaspora and Gab, and how these have successfully and unsuccessfully challenged social media cultures. And indeed, I'll talk about Parler in the context of Gab as well, and then look at alternatives to Western social media cultures and understand the importance of those sites in terms of their cultural milieu. So first of all, we'll begin with the dark web. What the hell is the dark web? That visual of the dark web has been used many, many times over the years, and it's not strictly accurate, but it does show that what we can see online is not everything that is out there. The dark web is the World Wide Web that exists on darknets, overlay networks, or through various permissions to access. So it's a very small part of what we call the deep web. That's all the World Wide Web which is not indexed by search engines. These tend to be small peer-to-peer networks as well as large networks like Tor, which some of you might use. I use quite a lot actually in terms of privacy as well. So the dark web is a very small subsection of the World Wide Web which exists cloaked in secrecy, really. You need to have a fair bit of knowledge to get on the dark web and to know how to use it. So websites on the dark web are usually only accessible through networks such as Tor or I2P. The identities and locations of users on those sites stay completely anonymous. And there's a layered encryption system called an onion system, means tracking anyone on the dark web is virtually impossible. Accessing it through Tor is really, really interesting because Tor was actually funded and developed by the US government through its DARPA program, which was the same program that developed the internet itself in the 1960s. So, as it was called ARPANET at the time. So the darknet encryption technology routes users' data through a large number of intermediate servers, thousands of them, which protects the user's identity and guarantees anonymity because you can never trace how many servers it's been through. It's a simple system, but it's an incredibly effective system for privacy. We've been concerned a huge amount about privacy in this module, so you can see why some people would be enjoying using this. So the result of this is a great deal of anonymous communication, which goes on the dark web, which means no tracking and therefore no commercialization, so no targeting of anyone, no data streams to profile people with, and no commodification, therefore, of sharing materials. Also, on the flip side of that means the darknet is used for illegal activities such as illegal trade forums and media exchange for paedophiles and terrorists. If you want to buy a gun, you get it on the dark web, drugs, etc., etc. But also other people who don't want their activities to come to light use dark web services. So Jamie Bartlett, writing about the dark web in 2014, Bartlett's main objective is an exploration of the darknet and its implications for society in his book, The Darknet. And what he writes about, in this book is really, really interesting for our understanding of the wider sort of world of computation, which social media is a part of, but not like in the same way that this is. Operating in an uncertain, high-risk market like those in the darknet actually breeds innovation that Bartlett believes can be applied to all markets in the future. So the Silk Road payment system, which is outlined here, for example, is a distributed payment system that people use for things like drugs and guns. So people exchange currency for Bitcoin. You then transfer your Bitcoin into an account. You make a purchase. The Bitcoin is held until that purchase has been completed. The vendor is then paid once you have the services. They move it into Bitcoin. They take their Bitcoin and exchange it for currency. So it's a completely traceless system because the Bitcoin provides anonymity, and indeed the Silk Road payment system provides anonymity as well. This was used in a government case in the United States against the Silk Road system. And just to fill in the gap here, the Silk Road is a website that operated on the dark web, which you could basically use to buy pretty much anything. Anything you can think of that was out there, it was on the Silk Road, but this is how you needed to purchase things. So we're already familiar with the forms of darknet use from our everyday internet use. You know, this kind of system here, if you just exchange Bitcoin to like your credit card or something like that, it's kind of the same system. Darknet is more consumer friendly, really. It's decentralized and without intermediaries. You know, Bartlett sees it as a really good thing. The dark web is part of the deep web, and as such is very difficult to map. Now, some people have tried it, and you can actually access that on this here. The difficulty in doing this is part of the attraction of using the dark web for social networking, though. The difficulty of tracing and being found is, for some people, a very attractive thing, which social networking, in their context, it makes social networking really, really good, sending messages to people, etc. It's so difficult to track, so difficult to trace, so difficult to locate on the overall architecture of the internet. This is a really, really powerful reason for using the darknet. And we solve a hell of a lot of problems of what we call the Clearweb. The issues of surveillance and privacy we encountered, not just like I've said last lecture, but I've actually changed the order of these things. So the lecture previous to that are largely solved if we use the dark web. There is no tracking, but there is no easy way of using the dark web itself, and it requires technical knowledge that goes beyond discourses on naive stuff about, we're all digital natives now. Actually, you really need to know how to use this stuff in order to get on with it. So why would anyone use the dark web? The use of the dark web is a disruption to cultures that we've discovered and talked about all the way through this module. It's a disruption to established social media culture. We need to ask what those things are. And in addition to mass commercialization and planetary level surveillance, we have filter bubbles and algorithms. And how those things control what we see, the dark web largely solves. Now, this involves an understanding of what we call algorithmic governance. Within the conditions of big data, an epistocracy emerges. An epistocracy is an elite based on knowledge. Okay? That constitutes a particular kind of governance based on computer-generated programmed algorithms. Algorithms are used to collect, collate, and organize data. And algorithms both assist in how data are structured, processed, and communicated through relevant systems, and structure and constrain how users interact with those systems, one another, the data, and the broader community that is affected by the system. So really what people like John Danaher are saying here is that algorithmic governance is a very important aspect of what goes on social media. If we take that last bullet point, the algorithms of social media assist in how our data is structured, processed, and communicated, and those algorithms structure and constrain how we interact with the systems and one another, and the data about us and others, and the broader community. So algorithms run all through this. Yevgeny Morozov refers to algorithmic governance as a web of invisible barbed wire, with systems of control, constrain, and construct our worlds without visibility and without us having the requisite knowledge to scrutinize these structures. The dark web effectively takes us out of these structures because these algorithmic tools can't operate on those systems because anonymity is so solid on them, they have no data to scrape in the first place. This is the argument we're making here, that maybe we should be looking to the dark web for our alternatives to social media. Now, the results of algorithmic governance are really, really profound. Algorithms continually sort and order data in social media, present a particular view of the world that is optimized for us as data or subjects. Eli Pariza, in his critically important book from 2012, calls this the filter bubble. We are presented with a particular vision of the world because that vision has been constructed specifically for us. We have no say in how it's constructed. We are just fed this vision. These filter bubbles keep us in a state of intellectual isolation. social media algorithms select what information we see based on information about our previous interactions with things, and users then become separated from information which disagrees with that viewpoint. And I ask, what is the effect for that of democracy? And I'm going to ask this in the seminar, but really, when you think of the recent election in America, two massively radical divides between people, Trump or anti-Trump, Trump or Biden, right? And of course, the Trump people just won't accept that he lost. The effect on the democracy of having one worldview presented to you all times is an inability to understand that there could be alternative worldviews, which there are. There are always alternatives to the way you think, or the way that somebody else thinks, right? The way that I think. There are always alternatives to that. But algorithmic governance has created a view of the world which doesn't provide us with those alternatives. And that makes the world an incredibly difficult place to live in. We don't understand why people do the things they do, because we're not exposed to their ideas. We're not, we have very little exposure of these things, so we have a lack of critical understanding of it. So again, looking at hyper-anonymity and looking at being able to be hidden away from these systems could be a good thing for democracy even. So, in terms of filter bubbles, the filter bubble is an absolutely defining characteristic of social media culture. The bubble effect has massive negative consequences for civil discourses, for how we even talk to one another, for how we understand one another as people. Huge negative implications for that. User exposure to fake news and echo chambers is very much related to the filter bubble effect and phenomena. Fake news preys on the filter bubble. You just pump out information which agrees with people's particular worldviews, and they don't question it. So when Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, talking about this in 2017, technologies such as social media let you go off with like-minded people, so you're not mixing and sharing and understanding other points of view. It's super important. It's turned out to be more of a problem than I or many others would have expected. Only Bill, if you'd only thought of this in the first place, dude, this would have been, it saved us so much hassle, right? And I mean, you look at that picture there of political blogs in America. Democrat in blue, Republican in red. Things which fit between the two in the middle. Huge discrepancy between the numbers of blogs that do these different things. Lots of Democrats, more Republicans, hardly any that take a politically neutral view. Social media filtering, the filter bubbles on social media have created what we call an atomized society, where we have a particular worldview which was reinforced continually and is not challenged by alternative views, because the algorithms keep this worldview for us. They protect us in a certain way, but that protection in itself is extremely bad for democracy. That's all I want to say about this for now. We'll talk more about the alternatives to it and to social media, filter bubbles, and how this kind of idea of how the dark web works could work for social media in the second video.